Out in the safari, experience means nothing if you stop respecting the animals. Hi, welcome. In today's episode, I'm looking at when safari tourists get eaten alive by deadly animals. From a tourist who stepped too close to the Zambezi River for the perfect photo, to a veteran safari goer who thought he knew the bush better than its predators. It was July 14th, 2016, and the dry season had pulled the color out of everything across the reserve floor. The grass had gone the color of old straw, bleached down to the root by weeks without rain. Heat rose off the cracked earth in visible layers, distorting the tree line at distance and making the horizon shimmer. The air carried the smell of dust, dried dung, and something organic decomposing somewhere out in the grass. Dana and Mark Ellison were Americans, both in their late 30s, visiting South Africa on a self-planned itinerary that combined lodges and independent driving. They had spent time in the days prior consuming online travel content that framed large wildlife reserves as scenic and approachable. Safari presented as something between a nature walk and a well-stocked zoo. Neither had prior safari experience. Neither had engaged a professional guide for this portion of the trip. They had rented a vehicle at the gate and entered the reserve independently, which park regulations permitted under specific conduct rules, but which placed the full weight of behavioral responsibility on them the moment they passed through. I've read a lot of incident reports over the years. The ones that did their research online tend to end the same way. Before entering, they had stopped and purchased raw meat, deli scraps, and packaged food. Footage they recorded themselves and later recovered by investigators made the intent plain. They planned to use the food to draw wildlife close enough for photographs they could not otherwise obtain. This is the part that stays with me. They filmed it themselves. Every step documented, recovered later as evidence against their own judgment. The behavior began early in the afternoon, multiple times across the first several hours. They stopped near areas of scavenger activity and pushed food through partially open windows towards spotted hyenas. Other vehicles in the area observed the conduct and reported it to rangers. Patrols were redirected, but by the time any unit was in a position to intercept, the Ellisons had driven deeper into the reserve along routes that added significant time to any response. Spotted hyenas are not domesticated animals. They are highly intelligent, cooperative predators and scavengers that function within a complex social hierarchy. In an environment where they associate human vehicles with food access, that association does not make them safer. It makes them more confident in approaching. When food competition is introduced, clan behavior intensifies. When one animal moves toward a food source, others follow. Dana and Mark Ellison had spent the afternoon building exactly this dynamic. What I find hardest to explain to people is that the hyenas weren't malfunctioning. They were doing exactly what hyenas do. The Ellisons had simply spent 4 hours teaching them to do it closer and closer. Near dusk, they parked beside a dry drainage channel bordered by tall grass along one of Kruger's interior tracks. The engine was shut off, both doors opened. Both individuals exited the vehicle, directly violating park regulations, prohibiting exit outside of designated areas. They began eating outside. Food scraps accumulated around the vehicle. Getting out of the vehicle is the line. Everything before it is dangerous. Everything after it is a different category of dangerous entirely. The first hyenas arrived cautiously, drawn by smell and prior conditioning around the vehicle. Their numbers grew. Within minutes, several animals were circling at decreasing distances. The Ellisons treated the situation the way someone treats stray dogs near a cafe table, laughing, filming, allowing the animals within a few meters without retreating. Spotted hyenas have a bite force among the highest recorded for any land carnivore, strong enough to crush large bone. Adult females can exceed 140 pounds. They are built to dismember carcasses and hold ground against lions over contested food. They do not need assistance to be lethal. When one hyena snapped at a bag of meat near Dana's feet, the situation collapsed instantly. Both moved toward the vehicle. Food hit the ground. Shouting began. Multiple hyenas rushed toward the scattered scraps. Mark ran around the vehicle. Running is a direct trigger. A large mammal breaking into sudden motion at close range activates chase behavior in most carnivores, regardless of prior entire context. Mark Ellison fell on uneven ground at the edge of the drainage channel. He did not get up before the animals reached him. He died from traumatic injuries sustained on the ground, multiple bite wounds to the neck, torso, and limbs, before rangers reached the scene. Dana reached the vehicle and pulled herself inside, but failed to secure a rear door before it swung partially open. The clan had not disengaged. Several animals remained at the vehicle, drawn by the food still scattered around it and the noise still coming from inside. She was 6 inches from surviving. That rear door is the detail I keep coming back to. Rangers reached the vehicle after dark. The engine was still running. Multiple doors were open. Dana Ellison was located several meters from the vehicle. She had exited at some point during the night, possibly through the partially open rear door. She had not survived. Cause of death for both was determined to be traumatic injuries, consistent with spotted hyena attack. I don't tell these stories to assign blame. I tell them because the pattern repeats, and most people don't know it repeats, and some of them are going to be in a reserve next season.
It was August 11th, 2015, in Kruger National Park. A pride of 7 lions lay scattered across the red dirt beside the road, bellies swollen, limbs loose, the kind of stillness that makes people forget what they're looking at. Bradley Pavone was 35 years old, an insurance adjuster from Columbus, Ohio, who spent most of his professional life behind a desk, assessing damage he never witnessed firsthand. The Kruger trip was his brother idea, a celebration before Bradley's promotion to Senior Claims Director, a role that would likely anchor him to an office for the next decade. Bradley had never been to Africa. He had booked the mid-range safari package, arrived 2 days earlier, and had already earned a reputation among the group as the loudest person in the vehicle. Not unpleasantly so, but the kind of man who narrated everything as it happened and laughed at his own observations before finishing them. He photographed constantly. He had told Deontay the night before that he wanted one image worth framing. The lion pride had fed the previous evening on a buffalo carcass roughly 1/4 mile north of the road, and several lions still bore visible blood staining on their muzzles and forepaws. Adult female lions in Kruger typically weigh between 260 and 400 pounds and can accelerate to nearly 50 miles per hour in short bursts. They do not require hunger as a trigger for aggression. Territory, perceived threat, and proximity are sufficient. The guide, a veteran operator named Dion, who had run that circuit for 11 years, addressed the vehicle before they stopped. He explained, plainly and without drama, that satiated lions are not safe lions, that their proximity to the road did not indicate comfort with humans on foot, and that the instruction to remain inside the vehicle is one of the most fundamental safety rules in Kruger National Park. I've read accounts of guides giving this exact speech and being ignored anyway, and it never stops being infuriating. Bradley acknowledged the instruction. He also spotted a second safari truck, stopped roughly 60 yards ahead, angled for a better view of the nearest lioness, and began calculating the difference in perspective. He stepped off the running board without announcement. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Deontay saw him go and said nothing for the first few seconds, likely assuming Bradley would stop at the vehicle's bumper. People have stepped out of safari vehicles before without immediately provoking an attack. Bradley, however, kept walking. He did not stop there. He moved forward along the road unhurried, phone raised, covering approximately 35 feet of open ground toward the nearest lioness, despite the warning he had just been given before she lifted her head. What happened next took under 4 seconds from the moment she rose. I don't think most people understand how little time that actually is. She did not vocalize. She crossed the distance in a straight line and struck him from the front, driving both forepaws into his chest and dropping him flat onto his back. The impact was audible to passengers in both vehicles. His phone landed in the dirt several feet to his right. The lioness closed her jaw across his throat while he was still moving. The sounds that followed, described by witnesses in both vehicles as wet, repetitive, and brief, lasted under 90 seconds before a second lioness rose from the grass to his left and locked onto his upper right thigh, pulling downward with her full body weight, while the first maintained her grip on his neck. His legs moved twice, then they didn't. This is the part that stays with me every time I go back through witness statements, the speed at which a human being becomes entirely still. Dion sounded the vehicle horn repeatedly and edged the truck forward, following the emergency response procedures taught by his safari company, and it accomplished almost nothing in real time. Both lionesses responded to the horn by dragging the body laterally off the road into the drainage brush, disappearing into cover within seconds. The entire sequence from Bradley stepping out of the vehicle to disappearance was under 3 minutes. Deontay made the emergency call immediately. Rangers arrived in approximately 18 minutes. Recovery of the body required 2 vehicles and a separately dispatched unit to relocate the Pride. The coroner's summary noted death by mechanical asphyxia resulting from traumatic cervical injuries. Death preceded ranger arrival. Park officials concluded the lions behaved normally. Dion returned to guiding several weeks later, and I'm genuinely relieved that one reckless decision didn't permanently end the career of a man who did everything right. The failure that morning belonged entirely to the person who stepped off the vehicle.
It was March 14th, 2015, at a working ostrich farm on the R328 outside Outshorn in the Western Cape. Vanessa had been married less than a year, trying to build a family that didn't quite want her yet, and she was losing an argument she didn't even know she was having. Vanessa Greer was 34, a secondary school administrator from Bristol, who had married Dale Greer 11 months earlier. The South Africa trip had been her idea, including a last-minute stop at an ostrich farm she booked after seeing a brochure at their guest house. Dale's children, Liam, 11, and Priya, 9, showed little interest, and as the trip grew tense, Vanessa kept pushing harder for everyone to enjoy it. Ostriches in the main enclosure, 7 adults, ranged between 220 and 280 pounds and stood close to 8 feet tall. They have forward-facing kicks powered by legs capable of delivering over 2,000 pounds of force per strike, with a single claw on each foot capable of causing severe and potentially fatal trauma to large animals, and that include us humans. You have to understand that they are not domesticated, they are managed. The guide, a farm employee named Joe, warned the group to stay behind the rope line and avoid approaching or feeding the ostriches through the fence. Vanessa interrupted twice to complain that the rules seemed excessive compared to the close-up photos advertised online. A German family on the tour later said Joe repeated the warning after Vanessa had already stepped past the rope once for a photo and laughed off the correction as overdramatic for birds. Dale quietly pulled her back, and from then on, Joe kept a closer watch on her. The German teenager had been filming parts of the tour on his phone, capturing what happened next. At the third paddock, Vanessa moved to the rope line while the group was clustered near Joe, who was discussing feeding behavior. One adult bird, later identified by farm staff as a female, had separated from the group near the far fence and was moving parallel to the rope line at a slow walk. Vanessa stepped over the rope. Joe immediately raised his voice and stepped forward to order her back, but she was already raising her phone and had crossed fully into the buffer zone. Witnesses said that she justified just taking a picture in an irritated tone before waving Joe off with one hand. Witnesses saw the bird stop walking. It turned its head. Its wings, each spanning close to 6 feet, shifted outward from its body in a distinct posture that farm staff later described as a standard threat display. People heard Joe shouting. The bird covered the remaining 12 feet in under 2 seconds. The first kick connected with her upper chest and left shoulder, and she went down sideways onto the clay. The second kick came as she was falling, striking her lower abdomen before she fully hit the ground. She did not get up. The bird stepped forward and kicked again into her side as she lay on the ground. Dale crossed the rope line and reached her, and the bird turned and kicked him once across the left forearm and hip before Joe drove it back using a long-handled distraction pole. Liam and Priya were still behind the rope. Paramedics arrived 12 minutes later from a clinic on the main road. Vanessa was conscious but unresponsive to questions. She was airlifted to a hospital. Dale was treated on site for a fractured forearm and bruised hip and was discharged that evening. However, Vanessa died at 11:52 p.m. from blunt force internal injuries. The flight back was quiet, filled with administrative tasks, canceling the safari leg, arranging leave from work, and explaining to an 11-year-old why his stepmother wasn't coming home. Honestly, the tragedy was less the bird's violence and more the fact that even in her final moments, she was still arguing alone.
It was September 22nd, 2015, and the dry season in Huanghe National Park had reduced the landscape to austere clarity. Flattened grass, a thinned canopy, water holes, drawing animals from miles away. In terrain like this, an observer in an open vehicle can see a large animal clearly past 100 yards, and that visibility creates a reliable false confidence in people encountering it for the first time. Caleb Collins was 39, a sales manager from Johannesburg on his first safari. He was confident by disposition, described by people who knew him as someone who formed quick assessments and treated caution as optional rather than default. He had general outdoor experience from weekend hiking, but nothing that had prepared him for African wildlife at close range. He joined a group safari led by a guide who'd worked the park for years. The group encountered a large bull elephant feeding roughly 150 yards from the track. The guide stopped the vehicle and scanned the animal carefully, estimating him at 10 feet at the shoulder and identifying fluid running from the temporal glands and the swollen hindquarters. He explained to the group exactly what those signs meant and kept the vehicle stationary while he did. African bull elephants periodically experience a hormonal surge lasting weeks to months, during which the behavioral baseline shifts elevated aggression, a far lower threshold for offensive action, and a faster, less graduated response than the same animal produces otherwise. A bull in this state has been documented charging at speeds near 15 miles per hour, and an adult male can exceed 13,000 pounds. That mass and speed, at any distance a person can cover on foot, leave no survivable margin once it commits. The displays it produces before charging ears spread, head raised, ground striking, are not ceremonies. They mark a decision point. What makes this condition so widely misread by first-time visitors is that the bull producing these signals often looks, from a distance, identical to any other bull they've already photographed without incident. There's no dramatic visual transformation. The physical changes are subtle enough that an untrained eye would have no reason to treat this encounter differently than the last one. That gap is precisely why guides identify the condition before anyone steps off the vehicle, not after. What happened next isn't a story about unclear communication. It's about someone who processed the information accurately and set it aside. Caleb got out of the vehicle and walked toward the clearing for closer footage. The guide told him to return immediately.
I cannot get my head around this. The guide had just explained exactly what the animal was capable of, and the response was to open the door and walk toward it.
The guide had just explained exactly what the animal was capable of. The bull was already in active threat state temporal gland discharge, swollen hindquarters, ears at full extension. When Caleb continued advancing, the charge committed. A bull elephant at 13,000 plus pounds, accelerating to 15 miles per hour, generates an impact force that has no survivable margin at direct contact. The animal struck him with its head and tusks. Elephants in a committed charge will gore, kneel on, and crush a target. The tusks of a large bull can exceed 6 feet in length and carry the full forward momentum of the animal behind them. Witnesses described the sequence from ear spread to contact as faster than the guide's warning had time to register. The bull remained at the site for several minutes, a behavioral pattern documented in musk bulls, continued aggression toward a downed target before withdrawal.
Every warning that exists for this exact situation had already been delivered. The guide named the condition.
The elephant displayed the precursors in sequence. Witnesses said the bull stayed at the site for several minutes before withdrawing. Park rangers who reviewed the incident pointed out that the entire visible sequence from the first ear spread to the moment of contact had taken less time than the guide's original explanation of the condition. The information had been complete. The response window it described was not.
It was July 13th, 2013, and the delta channels of the Okavango system in Botswana ran cold and clear with midwinter flooding, the water high enough to push through papyrus-dense corridors in wide, transparent sheets, the banks low, the air dry, and still with the quality of the southern African winter that makes everything feel settled and contained. The channels moved with quiet purpose. Nothing about the landscape that morning suggested what was coming. Dylan Carrick was 34 years old. He worked in nightlife promotion, and his professional identity had been built around a specific capacity: the ability to dominate the social temperature of a room, to make himself the reference point in any gathering, to redirect attention toward himself when it shifted elsewhere. That capacity had its environment. A flat-bottom boat on a delta waterway occupied by a group of quietly watching tourists was not it. The group was on a guided river excursion, a small private operation run by a local guide, navigating a wooden vessel through a planned route through several channel systems. Wildlife along the margins was the explicit purpose of the trip. Midway through the excursion, the channel curved around a dense section of papyrus, and, as the bend opened, revealed a group of hippos resting directly in the water ahead at close range. The thick vegetation had concealed the animals completely until the boat was already committed to the line. The guide slowed immediately, read the positioning, and began the adjustment that would move the vessel clear of the animal's space as efficiently as the restricted channel allowed. Before he could complete that adjustment, Dylan stood up. I want to emphasize the timing, because it's central to understanding this case. The guide had already spotted the problem before the situation escalated. The boat was already moving toward the solution. The encounter was being managed by someone who understood exactly what the situation required. Then, Dylan stood up, grabbed a paddle, and began striking the water's surface repeatedly while making large, sustained gestures toward the animals. The guide was in the process of resolving the problem. Dylan converted it into something that could no longer be resolved. Hippopotamuses are the third largest land animal on Earth. An adult bull weighs between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds. They are responsible for more human fatalities annually in Africa than lions, leopards, or saltwater crocodiles, a fact that consistently surprises people who have built their mental image of hippos from their appearance rather than their behavior. Bull hippos are aggressively territorial in the water and maintain defined river sections with extreme defensive intensity. The hippo charged from its position in the channel. The approach covered the distance to the vessel in seconds, a mass exceeding 3,500 pounds moving through the water with no possibility of the hull avoiding the line of contact. The bull struck the port side with its full forward momentum. The impact transferred through the wooden hull and deck in a single pulse. Passengers were thrown hard across the boat in both directions. Dylan went over the side and into the water. The hippo, still carrying the momentum of the charge, pivoted in the water toward the entry point within seconds. Below the surface, it moved in the low, riverbed-driven push that carries a hippopotamus across short distances faster than the surface gives any indication of. The jaws opened on approach. The bite closed across Dylan's torso directly and completely. The effect on contact was immediate and absolute. He was driven beneath the surface. Dylan had built his career around getting people to look at him. On a river in Botswana, at the worst possible moment, he got exactly that. Investigators reviewing the incident found the guide's navigation appropriate given the channel conditions. The papyrus bend had concealed the animals until the vessel was already committed to the line, and his response had been immediate and correct. The conclusion was direct. A manageable situation became unmanageable the moment a passenger began deliberately provoking a territorial bull hippo from inside the space. The animal had already identified as a threat. It was the 17th of February, 2018, Nairobi, Kenya. A wildlife facility offering a controlled giraffe feeding experience from a raised platform. The platform kept visitors at head height while staying outside the giraffe's hind leg range. A step-down section on one end was used by staff for ground-level access. Olivia Wright was 41. She worked as a retail manager and ran her team the way she ran most things in her life, with confidence and the firm belief that experience was the same thing as expertise. She had fed giraffes before, 3 times, at different parks across 2 countries, and nothing had ever gone wrong. As far as she was concerned, that track record meant she understood how these animals behaved and what they were and were not capable of. 2 weeks before the Nairobi visit, she had been discharged from hospital after putting herself through an unregulated detox involving supplements and prolonged fasting that her body could not handle. 3 successful giraffe encounters, and she had decided she had the whole thing figured out. I think about that logic a lot. Nothing going wrong is not the same thing as understanding why nothing went wrong. She arrived at the facility with her daughter. The giraffe feeding experience was the main reason they had come. She had been looking forward to showing her daughter something she felt comfortable with. Her daughter stayed on the platform where visitors were told to stand. Olivia had brought her own food from home, granola and dried fruit, which the facility did not permit. Outside, food was prohibited for animal health reasons, and the rule was posted at the entrance alongside the other instructions. She had not mentioned it to staff, and they had not spotted it before she stepped down. She listened to the keeper's instructions before the session began, decided they were aimed at people who had never done this before, and stepped down through the open staff access section to ground level. The platform kept visitors positioned at the giraffe's head level and forward of its kick arc. Standing on the ground, placed her alongside and behind the giraffe's body, directly within the range of its hind legs. She did not know that distinction existed. The giraffe was an adult male that had been pacing and repeatedly repositioning throughout the session as the number of visitors and the frequency of feeding approaches increased around it. The keeper was standing several meters along the platform, managing other visitors at the same time. When he spotted Olivia on the ground, he called out for her to step back immediately. He could not reach her physically before she had already extended the food. She kept going anyway. She held a piece of granola out flat on her palm, arm extended, the way she had done at the other parks. The giraffe lowered its head and took the first piece without any aggression. Its movements were slow, and nothing about those first few seconds gave her any reason to stop. That calm confirmed everything she had already decided. She looked up at her daughter on the platform and smiled. She reached into the bag for a second piece and turned slightly toward her daughter as she did it. Her attention was no longer on the giraffe. She did not see the weight shift. The giraffe drove a rear leg outward in a single motion. There was no warning that registered to someone not actively watching for it. Giraffes kick fast, and they kick hard, and it was over before she could process that it had started. The kick struck her in the torso and lifted her off her feet. She landed hard on her side, and her head hit the ground on impact. She did not move after that. Staff reached her within seconds, and emergency services were contacted immediately. She died at the scene. The coroner recorded the cause of death as a combination of blunt force trauma to the torso and head, with findings consistent with multiple rib fractures, internal hemorrhage, and a fatal head impact sustained in the fall. Olivia's body was repatriated, and she was buried at home. Her daughter, who had been standing on the platform and witnessed what happened, was placed in the care of a relative following her mother's death. She had brought her daughter to show her something she felt confident about. Her daughter was on the platform watching when it happened. I do not have the words for that part of this story, and I am not going to try. It was the morning of July 29th, 2017, along a narrow channel in the Okavango Delta in Botswana, where the water moved slowly between walls of papyrus, and the air smelled of mud and reeds. The channel was quiet. The surface was still. Nothing visible suggested any danger. That stillness is part of what makes the Delta so disarming. Priya Sharma, 29, was a travel vlogger from Mumbai, India, with a growing YouTube channel focused on solo female travel. She had approximately 22,000 subscribers and was building a series on destinations in sub-Saharan Africa. She was organized and detail-oriented in her planning, but she had no experience with crocodile habitats and had not researched the specific risks of Mokoro travel in the Delta. That gap between general preparation and specific knowledge is something I come back to often in these cases. Priya had planned the trip carefully, booked a reputable guide, and done the work. But she had not understood what the Delta specifically required of her, and that specific gap was the one that mattered. Her guide was a local operator named Kabo Sitol, 44, who had been running Mokoro tours in the Delta for over a decade. Kabo gave the same briefing every morning. Stay seated, keep hands and arms inside the canoe. At all times, do not lean toward the water. He explained that Nile crocodiles in the Delta were not always visible and could approach from directly below the surface. Priya had been filming throughout the trip, holding her camera over the side of the Mokoro to capture low-angle footage. Kabo had corrected her twice on the first day. She adjusted briefly each time, then returned to the same position. This is the part of the story that I find genuinely difficult to understand. The warning had been given clearly, more than once, and the reason behind it was explained, and yet the habit continued. I think there is something about calm water that makes people feel safe in a way that open savanna does not. And that false sense of calm is exactly what makes crocodile habitats so consistently deadly. A lion on the plains is visible. Nile crocodiles are ambush predators that wait submerged with only their eyes and nostrils above the waterline, detecting movement through vibration in the water before striking upward with explosive speed. An adult Nile crocodile can reach 16 feet in length and weigh over 1,500 pounds, with a bite force among the strongest of any living animal. What makes them particularly lethal is not the initial strike, it is what comes after. On the morning of July 29th, Priya was filming a slow pan across the water surface, leaning forward with her camera extended over the side of the Mokoro. Cabo told her to sit back. She held up a hand and continued filming. The crocodile had been stationary beneath the surface, less than 30 feet from the canoe. The strike came from below. The animal lunged upward and seized her right arm just below the elbow, pulling her forward and partially out of the Mokoro. Cabo grabbed her left arm with both hands and pulled hard. For a moment there was a struggle, Priya partially in the water, Cabo pulling from one side, the crocodile from the other. He was fighting with everything he had. The crocodile began to roll. The torque broke Cabo's grip. Priya went into the water. Cabo used the paddle to strike the surface repeatedly, but the crocodile had already submerged with her. The channel went still within seconds. The same stillness that had been there all morning returned as if nothing had happened. A response team arrived approximately 2 hours later. Priya's camera was recovered, floating near the reeds. Her body was found the following morning, partially submerged beneath a root system roughly a quarter-mile downstream. Post-mortem findings confirmed death by drowning, with significant trauma to the right arm and shoulder. The medical examiner noted that drowning was the primary cause. She had been held underwater, not killed by the initial strike. Cabo was cleared of negligence. He had given the warning, repeated it, and when the moment came, he had held on until the physics of the situation took that option away from him. Priya's family was notified through the Indian consulate. Her final video, uploaded 2 days before the incident, showed her boarding the Mokoro at sunrise, describing the delta as the most peaceful place she had ever been. She was not wrong about the beauty of it. She just did not know what was underneath it.
It was October 14, 2021, in the Okavango Delta, where a conservationist's final act was not documentation or advocacy. It was a lean toward an open vehicle door, an emotion that took less than a second and undid 15 years of careful work. Meredith Wachowski was 44 years old, a Washington, D.C.-based environmental activist who had spent the better part of 15 years working against trophy hunting legislation in Southern Africa.
Based on what I've read about her, she was not a tourist in the recreational sense.
She had visited the Delta twice before, both times for documentation work. Funded by a small conservation nonprofit she co-directed, she aimed to photograph the Santawani Pride, a group of 16 lions tied to a land use dispute she was actively documenting. She was highly methodical and mission-driven, and often set aside caution when she believed the work required it.
To me, it felt less like an introduction and more like the point where everything was already in motion.
The delta floor in that section runs flat and open between mopane thickets. It's the kind of terrain that looks passive until something moves through the tall grass parallel to your vehicle and you realize it had been there the whole time. The Santawani Pride had been ranging closer to vehicle tracks than usual that week, a behavioral pattern the camp's senior guide, Odirile Kossi, had noted in the log 2 days prior. African lions have no consistent fear of vehicles. Adult females in prides weighing around 265-400 pounds with regular human exposure habituate quickly to the shape and smell of open safari jeeps, and they test boundary the way any apex predator does, incrementally and usually without broadcasting intent. Kigossi had reported a faulty fuel gauge on day 3, but the replacement part had not yet arrived, and the group had been instructed to keep the route short that evening.
And of course, you already know they did not.
Meredith pushed toward the Eastern Channel, and the engine eventually died at 6:22 p.m., about 4 miles from the nearest junction. Kigosi radioed camp and ordered everyone to stay still as 4 lions appeared within 40 yards, with the number increasing to roughly 7 to 9 within the next 10 to 15 minutes as more emerged from nearby cover. The lions circled without urgency. Several moved underneath the chassis. One juvenile male placed its forepaws on the front bumper and investigated it briefly before dropping back down. A large female, later identified by research as a known animal in the Santawani group, moved to the open passenger side and stood with her head level with the floor of the vehicle. Kigosi repeated the instruction to stay down. Note that he had said it twice. Meredith rose from her seat, not standing fully but shifting her weight upward, leaning toward the open side, likely to see where the lioness had moved. She rose approximately 18 inches above the seat back. That was enough. The lioness immediately crouched and launched through the open doorway, landing across Meredith's lap and torso before biting into her face, shoulder, and neck. She dragged Meredith partially out of the vehicle and then fully to the ground within seconds, while the remaining passengers pressed away to the opposite side and Kigosi held fire due to risk to others and the rest of the pride. Additional lions closed in within about a minute, tightening the perimeter as the attack escalated rapidly and ended in under 3 minutes. Armed wildlife personnel arrived at 7:31, already an hour too late for Meredith's life. The coroner's summary documented fatal cranial and cervical trauma consistent with large feline predation. Her colleagues held a small fundraiser memorial in her name the following month, which raised money for the same anti-trophy hunting campaign she had died trying to advance. There is something genuinely hard to process about being killed by the exact animal you spent your career arguing deserved.
It was November 28th, 2013, and the night in the Sabi sand had come down fast and hard. One moment the bush was visible in the last orange of dusk, and the next it was a wall of dark beyond the reach of the convoy's spotlights. The vehicle beams cut forward across the track and caught reflective eyes in the grass at the edges. The leopard had dragged an impala carcass beneath thorn brush, roughly 20 meters from the track. The spotlights picked up its eyes first, 2 fixed amber points in the dark, then its body, as the light caught the rosette pattern along its flank. Julien Marceau, 44, was a French national and serious wildlife photographer on his 3rd trip to southern Africa. He was part of an organized night game drive, operating under a licensed field guide. The guides briefed all passengers before the convoy stopped. Leopards are defensively aggressive around active kills in a way that distinguishes them from most other large predators. Flash photography at close range near a feeding leopard had a documented history of triggering defensive attacks. The prohibition was not a preference. It was a condition of the stop. That sentence, "it was a condition of the stop," is doing a lot of work. What it means is, if you use flash, we leave. What it apparently did not mean to Julien Marceau was, if you use flash, we leave. Marceau continued using flash. Leopards can reach close to 200 pounds in a large male. They are arguably the most explosive of the African big cats at short range. A leopard that has made a kill and settled over it has committed its full predatory cycle to that resource. When it perceives a threat at close range, retreating means abandoning the kill. The leopard's response to the repeated flash was sequential and visible. Ears flat against the skull, the carcass repositioned deeper under the thorn cover. 2 low vocalizations. Each behavior was observed by multiple witnesses, watching from inside the vehicles, each a step in an escalation sequence with a clear endpoint. The leopard told everyone in that convoy exactly what it was going to do. It told them in order, with pauses between each step. Marceau was the only one who didn't seem to be watching. When the lead guide's attention was briefly divided, Marceau opened his door and stepped out. He moved several meters toward the brush line, attempting to clear the thorn cover and reach a direct angle on the carcass. The geometry of what he walked into was the problem. The leopard was positioned between the carcass and the inside of the brush. Behind it was dense thorn cover with no exit. In front of it was a human being closing distance from the open side. A leopard in that configuration has one available response. I've walked that kind of terrain in daylight. Even then, Even knowing what to look for, you don't see what's inside the brush until you're at the edge of it. Marceau walked toward it at night. The charge came from inside the brush at close range. The distance was short enough that there was no meaningful interval between the launch and the point of contact. The leopard made initial contact with Marceau's upper body and drove him to the ground, delivering sustained bite pressure to the throat and upper cervical region, consistent with the documented attack pattern across multiple incidents involving close human approach to feeding leopards. Armed staff intervened within seconds and forced the animal to release and retreat into cover. The response time was as fast as conditions allowed. Julien Marceau died from acute hemorrhage resulting from cervical vascular injuries sustained in the attack. He was pronounced dead before evacuation could be arranged.
It was September 18, 2016, on the open floodplain between satellite camps in South Luangwa National Park, Zambia, and somewhere in the last quarter mile of daylight. A 31-year-old man from Oregon made a decision that a grazing 2-ton predator had already made instinctively for him. Dante Tomlinson ran inventory at a warehouse distribution center outside Eugene, a job he described to co-workers as functional and deeply boring. He had spent 4 years saving for the Overland Africa trip, cutting weekends, skipping vacations, watching departure dates on travel forums the way other people watch sports. He had done serious backcountry hiking in the Cascades and the Olympics and knew how to read terrain. What Dante didn't have, and what many of us don't have, is any real experimental frame for African megafauna. Backpacking the Pacific Northwest trains you to respect bears at a distance. It does not prepare you for an animal that kills more humans in sub-Saharan Africa than almost any other. Hippos are not grazers that wander casually. They are territorial, deeply habitual, and they use the same overland paths from water to feeding ground every single night, committing those routes to memory over years. A mature bull maintains his own corridor and treats any obstruction as a direct threat. They reach speeds exceeding 19 miles per hour on land. Their bite force exceeds 1,800 pounds per square inch. The rangers at camp briefed guests on all of this during afternoon orientation. The briefing included a specific instruction. After 4:30 p.m., guests moving between camps were required to use the designated access road along the eastern perimeter. The road added approximately 0.9 miles. Dante had been told this directly. He acknowledged it. Then he asked how enforced it was. Honestly, reading through accounts like this, what bothers me most isn't the risk itself. It's that the information was right there, delivered clearly, and still dismissed as an inconvenience. A camp tracker working near the trailhead noticed Dante stepping off the path around 5 to 10 p.m. and called after him. Dante waved the man off. He had already spotted the grazing trail, the flat pressed grass, the wide hoof impressions driven deep into soft soil, each one the width of a dinner plate. He kept walking. At approximately 5:22 p.m., a safari vehicle traveling the access road spotted Dante moving through the central floodplain. The guide cut his engine. The bull emerged from a reed channel to Dante's left, not from the river, but from an intermediate resting position between two feeding areas. Dante was directly between the animal and its return route. The hippo charged without vocalization. Dante turned. He did not run more than 2 steps. The first bite closed across both legs simultaneously, lifting him completely off the ground. The guide later told rangers it looked mechanical, just force applied without hesitation. The bull slammed him into the mud twice. The second bite drove across the pelvis. The next bite entered the lower abdominal cavity. The bull then began shoving the body laterally toward a shallow channel using repeated lateral head sweeps, pausing twice to bite again into the torso. The entire sequence lasted under 60 seconds. The hippo remained nearby, facing the approaching responders and making repeated threat displays until it was driven back. I cannot imagine what that guide had to carry home that night. The safari driver radioed park control at 5:23 p.m. and rangers and a medical team arrived 26 minutes later. The hippo had to be driven back before recovery was possible. The post-mortem examination documented massive bilateral femoral fractures, complete pelvic disruption, and evisceration of the lower abdominal cavity consistent with repeated large animal bite trauma. His family received his belongings, including the spreadsheet, 11 days later. A small service was held in Eugene. The safari camp reinforced its evening safety briefings the following morning. And that detail alone tells you something about how little weight a single death carries against the rhythm of an operation.
It was August 14th, 2014, on the Victoria Nile inside Murchison Falls National Park, Uganda, where the river flattens into wide channels between shifting sandbar shelves, and the afternoon had gone quiet, in the way the guides knew better than the tourists ever would. Elise Hartman was 36, a freelance regulatory consultant from Hamburg who had built a professional identity around identifying institutional failures. She traveled frequently, documented everything, and had a reputation among colleagues for pushing back against authority when she believed protocol was being applied arbitrarily. She had booked a 5-day safari through a licensed Kampala-based operator, the Nile stretch being the second day. Her stated goal, mentioned to at least 2 other passengers the night before at the lodge, was specifically to witness the crocodile behavior in the wild, not in a sanctuary. The Nile crocodile, adults regularly reaching up to 16 feet and exceeding 2,000 pounds in large dominant specimens, does not chase. It holds still in shallow water near exposed shoreline, often fully submerged except for the eyes, and waits for something to enter the strike zone. And of course, you already know their signature death roll. That August was peak nesting season, and females had been confirmed within 200 meters of the primary boat channel for 2 consecutive weeks prior. The guide had received a radio advisory that morning warning all river operators to avoid unscheduled passenger disembarkation along the central sandbar corridor due to confirmed nesting activity. He relayed this to the group at departure. At approximately 2:20 p.m., Elise began complaining of nausea and cramps, demanding the boat stop so she could stand on solid ground. The guide declined, citing the advisory directly, and maintained a strict no disembarkation safety posture in line with park protocol. She escalated. She accused the guide of fabricating the restriction to cut the excursion short. The argument lasted approximately 9 minutes. At 2:31 p.m., Elise stepped off the bow onto the sandbar unassisted while the guide was repositioning and a second crew member was at the rear engine. She landed in approximately 4 inches of water at the bar's edge. She had been standing there no more than a few seconds, roughly 6 to 8 seconds by witness estimation. The crocodile came from her left, out of water that appeared no deeper than her ankles. There was no warning sound. Witnesses described the initial movement as a white spray and a single heavy impact. The animal's jaws closed across her left thigh and lower hip. The force of the strike knocked her sideways and partially into the deeper channel adjacent to the bar. For approximately a brief moment lasting only a few seconds, she remained visible above the waterline, upper body twisted, one arm extended toward the surface. Then the crocodile rolled. A death roll in shallow water generates enough rotational force to cause catastrophic injury. This time, she went under. The guide immediately throttled the engine, shouted warnings, and radioed river patrol while maneuvering the vessel away from the sandbar edge. The animal did not resurface in that location. The river absorbed visibility rapidly, with strong current and sediment disturbance reducing surface clarity within seconds of the initial strike. A patrol vessel and wildlife unit arrived on site at approximately 30 minutes after contact. Full remains were not recovered. Death ruled accidental, with notation of victim-initiated departure from vessel against direct operator instruction during an active wildlife advisory. Authorities updated river access enforcement protocols within 60 days. No public statement was issued. What makes this case genuinely hard to process isn't that the risk wasn't communicated. It was communicated clearly, professionally, and more than once. Elise made a calculation that her own judgment outweighed the guide's, stepped onto that sandbar to prove a point, and the river settled it in under 10 seconds.
It was July 18, 2017, and the Zambezi River Valley sat in the dry season's defining quiet, the stillness that arrives when water is scarce everywhere except the river itself, drawing everything toward it in concentrated numbers. The banks held the compressed evidence of everything that had passed before tracks, pressed deep into the mud, slide marks near the waterline, worn channels where large animals had descended and returned. To someone unfamiliar with that ground, the river looked like a peaceful gathering place. To someone who everyone knew what those marks meant, it looked exactly like what it was. Natalie Miller was 31, from Perth, Australia, and had spent 3 years saving for this trip. With a strong visual sense of what she wanted to capture: sweeping landscapes, animals at the water's edge, the kind of photographs that communicate wildness without communicating the conditions that make wildness dangerous. She worked as an administrative supervisor in Perth and was precise and capable in areas she understood, and genuinely impatient with caution elsewhere. By the 4th day, she'd grown attached to the river, remarking to others that it looked peaceful despite everything she'd heard before arriving. That morning, the guide pointed out fresh slide marks pressed into the mud, wide depressions, a large crocodile leaves hauling itself from the water and back. He said the displacement suggested they were only hours old. Most of the group stepped back.
I'll be honest, fresh slide marks in crocodile country would have been enough for me. Full stop, turn around, back in the vehicle.
It is already a very obvious warning sign that a crocodile is there, especially when you can't see it. The Nile crocodile isn't built for open pursuit. It manages distance and compresses opportunity. An adult can stay motionless beneath the surface for over an hour, only the ridges above its eyes breaking the waterline indistinguishable from debris at any range. What looks like rest is the animal waiting for a gap to close to a specific threshold, refined over millions of years against prey that, unlike modern tourists, evolved to read the signs. Once that threshold closes, the strike is explosive, covering the distance faster than most people can register it's begun. A large male can exceed 1,000 pounds and 16 feet. Natalie moved away from the group for a better angle, wanting the river behind her in frame, and descended the muddy slope to get it. The guide told her to step back. She kept moving, attention on her phone screen, her back partially to the water, exactly the condition the crocodile had been counting on. That detail matters. The decision to keep moving was made with full awareness that a warning had already been given. At this point, it's playing with the Grim Reaper. The crocodile had been motionless beneath the surface, likely for an extended period, waiting for the threshold distance to close. When Natalie descended the muddy slope with her back partially to the water, it launched. The strike was explosive. A Nile crocodile of significant size generates a bite force exceeding 5,000 pounds per square inch, among the highest of any living animal. It seized her leg, the jaws clamping with an immediacy that bypasses any reaction window. The animal then executed death roll, the rotational movement crocodiles use to disorient, subdue, and dismember prey, and dragged her beneath the surface. The sequence from first contact to full submersion lasted seconds. No one on the bank had time to move. The water closed over her with almost no surface disturbance. Search teams operating downstream in the days following recovered partial remains, consistent with a large crocodile feeding and dispersing.
That's the detail people who haven't spent time around large crocodiles consistently underestimate. There isn't a build-up phase you can react to.
The guy did everything correctly. The warning was specific and timely, and it still happened. Because being told something is dangerous and believing it applies to you right now are two different events. One is information, the other is belief. The guide leading the group had worked that stretch of the Zambezi for the better part of a decade, and later said the crossing point was one he actively steered groups away from, not because an attack was guaranteed there, but because the geometry of the bank and the volume of animal traffic using it made it the worst place along that section of river to stand close to the edge. Search teams downstream recovered what the slide marks had already said, that the bank she descended onto was an active crossing point. The outcome was written in the mud before the group arrived. One woman died at a river whose surface gave nothing away. It was July 29th, 2017, in Kenya's Masai Mara National Reserve, and by the time the water reached the dashboard of the Land Cruiser, Declan Catron had already lost the ability to push himself free. Declan was 52, a former Marine who traded his service record for a Land Cruiser and a satellite radio in East Africa. He had guided safari vehicles for 11 years, most recently with Kibo Safaris, a mid-range operator that prided itself on small group sizes and experienced staff. His reputation among colleagues was uncomplicated. He was efficient, read riverbanks correctly, and got crossings done without theater.
He had a knife with Mombasa and a son working in Aberdeen, making the aftermath of this story more gut-wrenching for me to tell.
The Mara River, during the wildebeest migration, runs murky and heavy with highland sediment year-round, and during August, it hosts one of the highest hippo densities on the continent. Adult bulls are capable of generating bite force above 1,800 pounds per square inch. They do not pursue, they hold position, submerge, and strike when their space is entered. During dry consolidation periods, when multiple pods compress into shrinking river sections, encounters become significantly more volatile. Declan had scouted the bank from the elevated eastern ridge that morning, assessed the surface as calm, and loaded 6 passengers for a migration crossing that had been stalled 2 days by weather and congestion at the primary fords.
In theory, he did everything right by the book. So what went sideways in this report?
Mid-crossing, a passenger noticed a brief patch of bubbling, muddy turbulence near the driver's side. If I was one of the tourists, that small visual cue is exactly the kind of detail I would have questioned more aggressively in hindsight. Declan slowed and attempted to reverse, but weak traction on the soft riverbed prevented quick withdrawal. Then the bull came up without warning. It surged from the submerged channel and struck the driver's side with a forward charge, its jaws opening as it impacted the door frame and lower sill, biting and pushing into the metal. The force rocked the vehicle hard to the right and briefly unloaded the left side suspension, causing the wheels to lose contact with the uneven gravel shelf. Declan was driven sideways into the steering column. He had not recovered full position when the second impact arrived. This one came lower, with a hippo driving its head and partially clamped jaws under the chassis and door seam, pushing upward and inward against the vehicle. The vehicle lurched and tilted left. Water entered simultaneously through the driver's door seam and the rear passenger gap. Based on the report, the door had apparently deformed inward against Declan's left hip and leg during the second impact. As the vehicle settled at roughly 45 degrees and the cabin flooded, he could not generate the leverage to push himself clear. Passengers forced the right side windows down and pulled through. 2 made it onto the roof. 2 others reached the downstream shallows. The hippo struck the submerged driver's side at least 4 more times, directly mauling Declan inside, even after the vehicle had stopped moving, alternating between biting at the frame and pushing its head against the submerged door panel before submerging again. Rescue teams arrived 35 minutes later and recovered Declan from inside the cabin, still pinned. Death was attributed to drowning secondary to traumatic entrapment. Blunt force injuries were combined with deep lacerations and crushing trauma, consistent with hippo. Bite engagement was documented across the left hip, pelvis, and lower ribcage. I feel a heavy sense of finality here, because even a rapid response window still reads as painfully slow in a situation that unfolds in seconds. In hindsight, his military precision meant little against an animal that doesn't negotiate, only reacts to intrusion in its space.
It was the late afternoon of August 6th, 2013, in a private game reserve in the Limpopo province of South Africa, where the bush was dry and the grass had turned yellow from months without rain. Near the reserve's northern boundary, a small group of spotted hyenas had been feeding on a carcass since midday. Animals move differently when water is scarce. Johan van Rensburg, 44, was a South African safari guide with over 15 years of experience in the Limpopo bushveld. Widely respected among colleagues, he had guided hundreds of clients through the same terrain without incident. That familiarity had also produced a quiet confidence in his own judgment, a belief that he could read a situation accurately enough to act where others would not. I think this is one of the most dangerous places a person in the field can end up. Not ignorance, but the kind of experience that starts to feel like immunity. Understanding how animals behave from a vehicle or with clients, or in the dozens of situations that resolved without incident, is not the same as being on foot, alone, at a feeding site, with no deterrent and no backup. Johan received a report that hyenas had been active near the northern fence line, with signs of a fresh kill. He decided to investigate on foot, alone, before nightfall. He told a colleague he would be back within the hour. That detail, telling someone he would be back within the hour, suggests he understood there was some level of risk involved. He simply believed that his experience was sufficient to manage it. That belief was the error. Spotted hyenas are highly social and intelligent animals, and their behavior around an active kill is something I think most people, even experienced guides, underestimate. A clan at a feeding site is in a state of heightened arousal, competitive and territorial, with a bite force exceeding 1,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush the femur of a large ungulate cleanly. What makes them particularly dangerous in a group is not just their physical capability, but their coordination. They test, they flank, and they escalate in stages. If the test is not answered correctly, the next stage follows almost automatically. Johan located the feeding site, roughly half a mile from the fence line, and counted at least 6 animals. The constant whooping and giggling vocalizations went quiet the moment he arrived. That silence was a signal Johan recognized. He had heard it before from vehicles. He had never heard it while standing on foot, and from what I've studied, that distinction matters enormously. The animals were not ignoring him. They were assessing him. The nearest animal turned to face him fully, head low, shoulders raised. 2 others shifted to his sides without approaching. Johan took a slow step backward. The nearest animal took a step forward. He recognized the escalation and began backing away more deliberately. But what he misread was the animal that had circled wide through the brush and was now less than 15 feet behind him. That is the part of this story that I find most significant. Johan was reading the situation in front of him, tracking the animal facing him, monitoring the 2 that had flanked him. He was doing what an experienced guide would do, but the hyena behind him had moved through the brush without making a sound, and by the time Johan knew it was there, the distance was already gone. The bite came from behind, catching him across the back of his right thigh. He spun and struck the animal hard across the snout. It released and backed off, vocalizing loudly. The rest of the clan responded to the sound. The intimidation phase was over. Johan fought back. He was large and physically strong, but on the ground, outnumbered, without any deterrent, the situation deteriorated quickly. He sustained bites to both legs, his abdomen, and his right hand before a reserve patrol vehicle approached on a nearby track, and the animals scattered. The sound of the vehicle was enough. The hyenas moved into the brush and were gone. That speed of dispersal is something I think about in the context of what Johan had been trying to do. He had gone out there believing he could manage the situation on foot. A vehicle, just the sound of one, accomplished in seconds what he could not accomplish at all. The patrol team reached him within minutes. He was alive and conscious, telling them what had happened. The wounds to his abdomen were the most serious. He died en route to the reserve's medical post from blood loss, with the abdominal injuries identified as the primary factor. He had been conscious long enough to describe the encounter, which means he knew in those final minutes exactly what had happened and why. The reserve issued updated protocols prohibiting solo foot approaches to active predator feeding sites under any circumstances, regardless of experience level. Johan recognized the silence. It was September 8th, 2014, and the South African bushveld in the weeks before the rains holds a specific transitional quality. The dry season grass is still pale and low, the air carrying a dryness that makes sound travel further than expected, and the early evening light producing an ambient warmth at the edge of the bush that makes the line between lit lodge grounds and unlit scrubland feel less definitive than it actually is. Trevor Maddox was 42 years old, a real estate salesman from England whose self-presentation was built around a consistent operating assumption that he was more capable of managing situations than the people who issued precautionary instructions about them. He was staying at a small privately operated lodge bordering a wildlife management area, a modest facility with a limited permanent staff, a small guest roster, and the standard protocols that lodges in areas with active predator movement maintain as a baseline. The rules weren't complicated. Stay within designated areas after dark. Don't go near the tree line or perimeter without a staff member, and report any wildlife sightings right away. Late that evening, Trevor noticed a leopard at the tree line. The hour was late, The overnight skeleton staff was managing other sections of the property. The nearest ranger was on patrol elsewhere. Trevor did not report the sighting. He went to the dining area, collected meat scraps remaining from the evening service, and walked toward the tree line. I want to be direct about what that sequence represents. He did not stumble into proximity with a predator. He left a designated area, gathered food, and deliberately walked toward a wild cat in the dark at the boundary of its territory. That is a series of conscious decisions, each one requiring him to choose to continue past the point where a reasonable person would have turned around. He made every one of those choices. He tossed pieces of meat onto the ground in front of him. The leopard remained at the tree line and watched. Trevor interpreted this as calm or acceptance and moved closer. What he had not accounted for was the dense wall of thorn scrub running directly behind the animal, a section of vegetation that closed off the retreat route the leopard would naturally have taken. The gap between them had narrowed to fewer than 10 feet. The leopard had nowhere to withdraw toward. Its options had compressed to one. Leopards are the most broadly distributed, large wild felid in the world, and they occupy a behavioral category that separates them from other large predators in one specific regard. Their behavior observed at distance provides almost no information about how they will respond at close range. An adult male weighs between 130 to 165 pounds, compact, dense, and organized entirely around explosive short-distance acceleration. The animal's weight shifted to its hindquarters, the subtle postural transition that precedes a committed launch in large felids. Trevor did not withdraw. The leopard closed the remaining 10 feet in under a second. Both forepaws impacted his upper chest and shoulders simultaneously, driving him backward off his feet. He went down hard. The leopard landed across his torso, and the bite followed immediately, targeting the back of the neck and throat, which is the position leopards use to compress the airway and suffocate prey. Its full body weight pinned him to the ground from above. From that position, under that weight, with the bite at his throat, there was no angle from which any useful physical response was available to him. Watching the animal calmly from the lodge veranda had given Trevor a baseline that meant absolutely nothing at 8 feet in the dark with dense bush behind it. The calm the leopard had shown across a wide distance was not an attribute of the animal. It was a function of the distance itself. He removed the distance. The calm went with it. Staff located him. After registering his absence, investigators concluded that Trevor had assembled the specific conditions for what occurred. A wild predator approached at night, on foot, with food stimulus introduced, backed against vegetation with no retreat available. The lodge's protocols had existed for documented reasons. He had simply decided those reasons applied to other people. It was the 14th of August, 2018, Serengeti National Park, northern Tanzania, open savanna stretching flat in every direction, tall grass breaking the sightlines in patches across the plain. A guided walking safari with 6 participants. The guide had found fresh lion tracks that morning before the group set out. The walk had been shortened as a result, and the briefing before departure had been direct. Stay tight, stay quiet. Do not move ahead of the guide under any circumstances. Kevin Marsh was 34. He worked as a personal trainer in Birmingham and carried himself the way physically confident people sometimes do, like the rules of an environment were suggestions until proven otherwise. He had come to Tanzania with 5 friends for his birthday. The trip was 3 days in when the incident happened. On the first day, he had left the trail twice and interacted with wildlife on one occasion. The guide had corrected him both times. Kevin had acknowledged it and continued in much the same way. Fresh lion tracks that morning, a shortened route, a direct briefing, 2 corrections from the guide in the previous 2 days. I am not sure what signal Kevin was waiting for, but whatever it was, the Serengeti had already given him several. The group set out on the morning of day 3 in close formation. The guide led. The group stayed behind him. The grass on either side was tall enough to limit visibility beyond a few meters in places. Kevin walked in formation for the first stretch and then gradually became restless. He spoke quietly to the friend beside him. He had heard somewhere that lions did not typically go for groups, that the size and noise of a cluster of people was enough of a deterrent to make an attack unlikely. He applied that logic to himself and decided the risk was low. He drifted forward, separating from the group by roughly 20 to 25 meters, moving ahead of the guide into open ground. He was no longer part of the group. He was an individual moving alone through predator territory, with lions confirmed in the area and likely moving through the grass nearby. He did not know how close. He was looking out at the plain with his back to the guide when the guide caught a brief movement in the grass, low and directional, not consistent with wind. The guide shouted. Kevin turned toward the voice. He did not locate the threat before the lion broke from the grass. The charge covered the remaining ground in seconds. A lion in full charge across short distance does not leave time for a warning shot to function as a deterrent. The guide fired. The charge was already fully committed. The lion hit him from behind and took him to the ground. It seized the back of his neck and drove him down, maintaining the hold. He did not get up. The rest of the group was pulled back immediately. The guide moved toward Kevin as fast as it was safe to do so. Emergency services were contacted, and the park's emergency response was activated. Kevin Marsh was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 34 years old. The cause of death was traumatic injuries sustained during the lion attack. His friend brought his body home. He was buried in Birmingham. Post-incident findings confirmed that Kevin had separated from the group against direct instruction given that morning in response to confirmed lion activity in the area. No fault was identified with the guide or the operation. He had come to Tanzania with 5 friends for his birthday. Those friends brought him home. I do not know how you explain that flight back. It was September 3rd, 2018, and the late dry season had done what it always does in that part of Zimbabwe. It had reduced available water to a handful of remaining sources and drawn every water-dependent animal into a tighter radius around those points. The Mopane woodland along the road had gone brittle and pale. Dust came up easily and hung in the heat before settling. Every track through Hwanga showed dense animal sign, because every animal in the region was moving along the same corridors toward the same water. Peter Voss, 47, was a Dutch national and experienced amateur photographer who had invested in professional-grade equipment and treated this trip as an opportunity to produce serious wildlife images. He was traveling as part of a commercially organized convoy moving through the park under licensed guide supervision and had used his telephoto lens throughout the trip from inside the vehicle, the only permitted method in that environment. He had been to Southern Africa twice before. He was not a novice. Rangers had briefed the convoy at multiple points that morning. The briefings were specific. Late dry season concentrations brought not just prey animals, but predators and browsers that followed them. Lone bull elephants were flagged directly. The conditions put a significant number of bulls into or near musth, and the rangers used the word explicitly. Musth is a recurring physiological state in adult male African elephants marked by a sharp elevation of testosterone, sometimes more than 50 times the baseline. The temporal glands discharge a dark, oily secretion visible on the face. Urine dribbles continuously and stains the inner legs. I want to be clear about something. The rangers that morning did not use euphemisms. They said the word must. They explained what it meant. This was not information that was withheld from Peter Voss. The convoy encountered a large bull feeding near the woodland edge, roughly 30 meters off the road. Multiple witnesses confirmed that the musth indicators were visible before any vehicle stopped. Temporal secretion was streaked clearly across the animal's face. The head-high posture was consistent with threat orientation. The bull had been watching the convoy since before they stopped. The guide positioned the convoy at a safe distance and issued standard instructions. Vehicles remain in position. No one exits. Doors stay closed. The telephoto lenses available were more than capable of producing usable images from those positions. Voss did not find the images satisfying. The bull was partly obscured by brush. Without informing the guide or signaling his intention to anyone, he opened his door and stepped out onto the roadside shoulder with his camera raised. Every person in that convoy watched him do it. Nobody could stop him. That's something guides carry with them for a long time afterward. The bull's response was immediate. Every guide and ranger present later confirmed that the animal's attention shifted the moment Voss left the vehicle. A mature bull can stand 13 feet at the shoulder and weigh upward of 13,000 pounds. At full charge, it can cover 100 feet in roughly 4 seconds. The bull spread its ears wide, lifted its trunk, threw dust forward, and made a short, fast advance before stopping and holding. Classic warning behavior, communicating that it has registered a threat and is prepared to escalate. Every guide in the convoy recognized the sequence. Voss interpreted the pause as hesitation. He began backing slowly along the roadside shoulder, continuing to photograph, continuing to present himself as a mobile element in the bull's field of attention. The correct response was to return to the vehicle immediately. The pause was not hesitation. It was the animal giving him one more interval to make the right choice. He used it to take more photographs. The pause ended. The bull's ears folded flat against its skull, its body lowered. It broke forward. Voss turned and ran toward the convoy. He lost footing on loose gravel and went down before he reached the nearest vehicle. The elephant reached him within seconds. The initial contact was a strike with the head that drove him into the road surface. What followed was trampling. Peter Voss died from multiple blunt force crush injuries to the chest and skull. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Elephants are the animal most people feel they understand. They seem slow, even gentle in footage. That misreading is itself a kind of danger.
It was July 24th, 2013, and the Chobe River crossing at the eastern transit route of Chobe National Park, Botswana, was running nearly 2 feet deeper than the level indicated on the depth marker beside the crossing, the kind of detail most people glanced at before pulling away. Lena Orsic was 27, a florist from Split who had a reputation for working 14-hour days in the week before Valentine's Day and never complaining about it. She was deliberate, organized, and had researched this trip for 8 months: budget safari accommodations, self-drive routes, riverside campsites. Tomas Jelak, her husband of 6 days, was 30 and worked as a diesel mechanic at a shipping yard outside Rijeka. He was the kind of man who could rebuild an engine in a gravel lot and had done exactly that more than once. They had saved for 3 years for this honeymoon and chosen southern Africa specifically because it was raw and unmanaged in ways that packaged resorts were not. Now, I think that reasoning was not wrong. It just required a discipline they ran out of at the wrong moment. Posted at the crossing entrance were laminated warning signs fixed to metal stakes, one in English, one in Afrikaans, one in Setswana. They stated clearly that vehicles must not stop mid-crossing and that occupants must remain inside the vehicle at all times. If I'm seeing warnings repeated in multiple languages, I'm assuming they're written because somebody already paid the price. I want to be honest with you. What happened next was not a freak accident. It was a sequence of choices that took roughly 4 minutes to become fatal. The Land Cruiser stalled approximately 40 feet into the crossing, where the water reached the lower door seams. Tomas tried the ignition once, but the engine did not catch. Instead of attempting another restart, Tomas and Lena climbed out onto the hood. The German family later told rangers they shouted from the bank. The couple waved back and held up the camera. A bull hippo surfaced roughly 10 feet off the driver's side, its nostrils and ears breaking the surface only moments before its head emerged. An adult bull hippo weighs between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds, can hold its breath for up to 5 minutes, and surfaces unpredictably in water that looks entirely still. They are widely regarded as one of Africa's most dangerous large mammals, not from aggression in the predatory sense, but from territorial defense that is immediate, total, and without hesitation. It was already bellowing before it fully cleared the waterline, a sound witnesses described as low and percussive, more felt than heard. The couple did not move immediately. The hippo lunged almost immediately, striking the Land Cruiser broadside with its head and upper body. The vehicle rocked hard to the right. It struck again, and the cruiser rolled onto its passenger side, both occupants entering the water almost simultaneously. The water came to chest height on a standing adult. Tomas was the first one the hippo reached. It took him around the torso, its jaws spanning from his lower ribs to his hip and compressed. The sound the German family described was not a scream. It was a single sharp exhalation, the kind a person makes when the air is forced out of them involuntarily. The hippo released, and threw him approximately 6 feet before turning. This is the part that stays with me. Lena was trying to reach the underside of the overturned vehicle when the hippo seized her across the hips. As it turned and submerged, she was pulled beneath the surface with it. She came up once, briefly. Then it pulled her under again. Neither of them surfaced after that. The German driver made the satellite call to park authorities at approximately 10:22 that morning. Rangers arrived with a rescue boat 31 minutes later. Both bodies were recovered within the hour. Coroner summary. Tomas Jalak, male, age 30, cause of death. Crush injuries to the thoracic cavity with bilateral rib fracture and internal hemorrhage consistent with large animal bite force. Lena Orsic, female, age 27, cause of death. Drowning secondary to traumatic pelvic injury and incapacitation. Both deaths ruled accidental. The crossing was closed for 4 days. When it reopened, the warning signs had been replaced with larger boards illustrated in 6 languages. I genuinely do not understand what it takes for a sign to be taken seriously, because apparently multiple signs, a warning from a passing ranger, plus a shouting family on the bank was not enough. It was August 14, 2018, and the Okavango Delta in Botswana sat at the height of its seasonal flood. Water pushed south from the Angolan highlands in the slow spread that turns the delta into one of the most ecologically concentrated environments on the continent. On foot, a person occupies the same physical plane as everything else moving through it. No elevation, no glass, no vehicle. Travis Clark was 56, retired from a contracting career in Texas, and had taken up extended wildlife travel as his primary pursuit. He developed a patient, unhurried photography style, the kind that comes from learning that sitting and waiting outperforms moving quickly toward action. He was steady and deliberate, qualities that had served him well across 4 incident-free days with a small group led by a guide who ran independent routes vehicles couldn't access. Operators who run multi-day walking safaris in the Delta typically brief every guest on the same basic structure before the first morning out single file. Guide at the front, fixed spacing maintained, regardless of how interesting something on the ground might be. The briefing Travis received was no different, and he'd followed it without issue for 4 days. The morning of August 14th was the first time anyone had broken from it. A male African lion at full maturity typically weighs 330 to 530 pounds, with large individuals in prime wet season territory at the upper end of that range or above it. What distinguishes a male at an active kill is the compression of his defensive response. He's at the intersection of a resource that cost real energy to acquire and a perceived threat to it. And the window between detecting that threat and responding is far shorter than in most other contexts. He doesn't broadcast warnings from distance. He responds from close range. In dense wet season vegetation, a person's senses are nearly useless as advance warning of a predator working 40 or 50 yards off the trail. Travis noticed fresh lion tracks crossing the trail and stopped to crouch and photograph them. The guide, several yards ahead, registered Travis wasn't behind him and called back. This is the moment that becomes permanent once you trace it back. The safety model of a walking safari depends entirely on the group holding formation, the guide, the spacing, the collective awareness function as one unit. The instant that breaks, the whole structure goes with it.
I've gone back and forth on this one more than any other, because Travis didn't do anything that looked like a mistake.
He stopped to photograph tracks. That's exactly what you're there to do. The terrible part is that the thing that killed him was indistinguishable from a completely normal decision until it wasn't. The male lion emerged from vegetation already within the defensive perimeter of his kill, meaning Travis was not detected at distance and charged. He was already inside the response threshold when the lion registered his spread. presence. At that range, a lion weighing upward of 400 pounds, closing from concealment, is on a person before the person can stand from a crouch. The initial contact from a male lion at a kill is typically an immediate bite. Males are less precision-oriented than females and tend to use raw force, targeting the head, neck, or upper body. The guide's warning shots cause the lion to withdraw rather than stay on the target. When the guide reached Travis, the injuries almost certainly to the skull and neck, given the crouched position Travis was in, were already fatal. The rest of the group reported hearing almost nothing beforehand. Officials determined a fresh kill had been made roughly 40 yards from the trail. The lion hadn't reacted to the group moving as a unit, only to the individual who fell behind and stopped alone inside the perimeter it was defending.
It was the evening of October 3rd, 2016, in a private conservancy bordering the Masai Mara in Kenya, where the sky had turned deep orange and the savanna grass caught the last light of the day. As the sun dropped toward the horizon, the bush shifted. Animals that had rested through the afternoon heat began to move. The conservancy was the kind of place that looked, from a distance, like a postcard. Golden light, open plains, the silhouette of acacia trees against a fading sky. Madison Blake, 22, was an American Instagram model from Scottsdale, Arizona. Her account had grown steadily on the back of luxury travel content, carefully staged photographs in remote locations that made the wild look effortless and safe. She had roughly 31,000 followers and was building toward brand partnerships. Her content relied on proximity, not just beautiful landscapes, but herself inside them, close enough to make the image feel real. She had no formal wildlife training and had never been on a safari before this trip. Everything she knew about African wildlife came from what she had seen online. The version of Africa that exists on social media is curated, compressed, and stripped of consequence. It shows the golden hour and the elephant at sunrise. It does not show what moves through the grass after dark, or what happens when someone treats a wild landscape the same way they would treat a photo set. The first 2 days passed without incident. Madison photographed from the vehicle, but the results frustrated her. The animals were too far, the light too flat, the images too ordinary. By the second evening, she had begun pushing the guide, a local operator named Festus Ochieng, 46, to position the vehicle closer than standard practice allowed. Festus held firm on the core rules. No one exits the vehicle after dusk. No exceptions. I've seen this pattern before in my research, where someone with no real field experience starts treating a guide's instructions as suggestions rather than rules, and it almost always ends badly. What is worth understanding about Festus is that he was not being rigid for the sake of it. He had worked that conservancy for years. He knew what moved through the grass at dusk, and he knew that the rules he was enforcing were not arbitrary. They were written in the outcomes of situations exactly like this one. On the evening of October 3rd, the group stopped at an elevated ridge to watch the sunset. Madison wanted to frame herself against the horizon, standing outside the vehicle with the plains behind her. Festus refused. She waited until his attention shifted to another guest, then quietly stepped out, moving roughly 65 to 100 feet from the vehicle to find her angle. That distance sounds small, on open ground, at dusk, separated from the vehicle by a stretch of grass that anything could be moving through. It is not small at all. What she did not know was that a clan of spotted hyenas had been active in the area since late afternoon. A fresh kill had been reported near a watering hole less than a mile from the ridge earlier that day. Spotted hyenas are not the passive scavengers most people picture. They are highly efficient hunters, capable of sustaining speeds near 37 miles per hour over distance, with a bite force exceeding 1,000 pounds per square inch, strong enough to crush bone entirely. They are most active at dusk and dawn, and they are acutely sensitive to isolated movement on open ground. What I find particularly important to understand about hyenas is that a healthy, upright adult human near a vehicle is not a target they typically pursue, but a lone figure at distance, separated from any large object, moving unpredictably in fading light, is a completely different calculation for them. The vehicle matters. The group matters. The moment Madison stepped away from both, she changed what she looked like to everything watching from the grass. Madison was focused on her phone, adjusting her position against the fading light. She did not immediately notice the first animal emerge from the grass, roughly 80 feet to her left. It stopped and watched. Then a second appeared, further to her right, also stationary. Their low whooping calls carried across the ridge. Festus heard them from the vehicle and immediately looked toward Madison. He called out. She did not hear him or did not register the urgency in his voice. She saw the animals and froze. Then she turned and ran. This is the part that I think about every time I look at this case. Spotted. Hyenas have a well-documented chase response. A fleeing target triggers pursuit instinct in a way that a stationary one simply does not. Running was the worst possible reaction, and it sealed the outcome almost instantly. The nearest animal closed the distance within seconds, bit into her left calf, and pulled her down. It released and backed off briefly, still testing, but she was no longer upright, and that changed the dynamic entirely. A standing human registers differently than a human on the ground. Once she was down, the calculation shifted again. Festus was already driving toward her, horn blaring. The second animal moved in from the right. By the time the vehicle reached her position, Madison had sustained bites to her lower legs and one hand. Festus fired a warning shot, and the animals retreated into the grass. He got her into the vehicle and drove toward the Conservancy's airstrip. Madison remained conscious for the first several minutes, then went quiet from blood, loss, and shock. The wounds to her lower legs were severe. The femoral region of her left leg had been compromised, and bleeding could not be controlled in the field. She lost consciousness before the airstrip was reached. A medical team was waiting, but could not stabilize her. She was pronounced dead approximately 40 minutes after the attack. The incident was classified as a wildlife fatality. Festus was cleared of negligence. The hyenas were not destroyed. The Conservancy issued updated safety guidelines reinforcing the prohibition on exiting vehicles after 5 p.m. Madison's body was returned to Arizona. Her social media accounts remained active for several weeks before her family quietly archived them. The final post, uploaded the morning of October 3rd, showed the Kenyan plains at sunrise with a caption about chasing golden hour. She had been chasing it that evening too. She just did not understand what else was out there, chasing alongside her. The hyenas did not pursue her because she was there. They pursued her because she ran. That distinction is the part that is hardest to sit with. It was March 14, 2018, at a private conservancy in southern Kenya. Janelle had earned this trip, 2 years of planning, a private vehicle, a premium experience she had paid for in full, but the savannah doesn't accept receipts. Janelle Whitcomb was 41, an American expatriate based in Dubai. The Kenya safari had been 2 years in the planning. Positioned in her mind as a personal milestone, she had earned according to her few friends that tolerated her. She had budgeted for a premium conservancy experience, hired a private vehicle and guide, and arrived with 2 camera bodies, a telephoto lens, and a phone permanently raised at eye level. I think what made Janelle's presence difficult was not impatience alone, but a consistent pattern of overriding professional instruction. Her guide, Osei, a licensed tracker with 11 years of field experience, had logged her behavior twice before the 3rd morning. The day prior, at a lion sighting, she opened the unlatched vehicle door before he had finished assessing wind direction. That evening, during a buffalo approach, she stood upright in the open roof hatch after being told to sit. He spoke to her firmly, both times. She said he was being overcautious, and that she had done this before. Osei had seen fresh leopard signs along the drainage ditch that morning, pug marks, a half-eaten impala, the musky scent of a predator holding territory. Most safari guests do not treat leopards with enough distance. Adults average 80 to 200 pounds, with forelimbs and shoulders built to pull down larger prey. A leopard in this context is typically defensive, not predatory toward vehicles, but will escalate rapidly if cornered or approach too closely at a kill. Osei stopped the vehicle about 40 yards back. A large male was visible at the ditch's edge, half hidden by scrub, crouched over the kill but already alert, head lifting, ears flattening. Through the open roof hatch, Osei told Janelle to remain seated and keep movement minimal. Twice she ordered him to move closer, stressing that she paid him to obey. He declined. The drainage cut behind the animal limited its retreat, he explained, so any pressure would be read as a threat. She told him this was exactly what she had paid to see, and that he was managing the experience for himself, not for her. During a brief moment when Osei shifted the vehicle forward slightly to improve distance and angle without leaving the cabin, Janelle pushed open the rear side door, which had not yet been secured after the stop, and stepped out. She moved approximately 15 feet from the vehicle toward the ditch edge before Osei's voice from inside the vehicle becomes sharp and direct as he notices her through the side mirror and turns his attention fully toward her movement. The leopard, which had been stationary, registered her movement and pivoted from the edge of cover rather than open ground, committing once the perceived distance collapse became immediate. It did not hesitate. The charge from its position to contact covered roughly 20 feet in under 2 seconds. The impact knocked her backward and to the left into the low scrub bordering the ditch. She did not fall cleanly. Her right leg caught on a root cluster, and she went down at an angle, partially inverted. The animal made contact a second time while she was grounded, its jaws closing on her lower abdomen before Osei's shout caused it to release and spring back into cover. Osei secured the brake, grabbed the mounted radio, and exited only after confirming the leopard had withdrawn into vegetation, then ran to retrieve a medical kit. The leopard withdrew further into the drainage brush. Janelle was conscious when Osei reached her. She had 2 injuries, a claw rake to the right hip and upper thigh, and a bite to the lower abdomen. The abdominal wound was critical. Osei applied direct pressure with a field kit and radioed the Conservancy Patrol immediately. She died from blood loss approximately 30 to 40 minutes later during evacuation coordination before the aircraft arrived in the field. The guide followed every correct protocol. The warnings were given, repeated, and documented. I think what is genuinely difficult about this case is not the animal's behavior. Leopards do exactly what leopards do. It is the fact that the word no from a trained professional had become, somewhere along the way, just an opening position. It was February 22nd, 2015, and the Delta was flooded. Recent rains had pushed water across ground that had been dry for months, softening the banks into unstable mud and extending the reach of seasonal channels in ways that weren't immediately visible from above. The edges of the flood were deceptive. The boundary between bank and water blurred by silt and submerged vegetation that looked solid and wasn't. Sean Hartley, 36, was an Australian national staying at a private bush lodge in the Delta on the final nights of a 2-week trip through southern Africa. He had arrived with serious photographic intentions and spent his days on guided drives producing images he was satisfied with. What remained on his list were hippos photographed at night beneath moonlight, and he had identified this as a specific goal before leaving for his final evenings at the lodge. The lodge maintained explicit nighttime protocols. Guests were briefed on arrival and reminded at dinner each evening. Movement outside the accommodation area after dark required an armed escort. Crocodiles had been sighted repeatedly near the seasonal flood channels in the days immediately before Hartley's arrival. The restriction applied to all guests without exception. The protocols at lodges like this one are not bureaucratic overcaution. They are written in response to specific events. Someone read an incident report and added a rule. Sean Hartley walked past that rule in the dark. Security footage captured him leaving the tent area at approximately 10:20 in the evening, carrying his camera, tripod, and headlamp. He moved toward the water. No escort had been arranged. No staff had been notified. Nile crocodiles are ambush predators. They lie motionless beneath the surface or against the underside of a bank shelf, detecting the world through vibration, pressure change, and shadow. A large Nile crocodile in position beneath a bank edge produces no visible surface disturbance. In low light conditions, even at very close range, it is undetectable to a human observer who does not know precisely what to look for. Nile crocodiles in the Okavango reach up to 16 feet in length and weigh over 1,000 pounds. Their bite force ranks among the highest recorded for any living animal. The strike from concealment covers a short distance at a speed that eliminates human reaction time entirely. The follow-on behavior, gripping, rotating, and pulling the target into the water, is designed to drown prey before injury becomes the primary cause of death. People always ask what the worst way to go would be. I never answer that question, but I think about Sean Hartley when they ask it. The saturated bank had converted what would have been firm ground into soft mud that provided no reliable traction. Investigators concluded that Hartley had moved past the designated viewing platform and along the bank toward the waterline, searching for a lower camera angle on the water. Tripod leg impressions placed him well beyond the platform's edge, at a point where the bank dropped gradually into the shallows. At approximately 10:40 in the evening, guests in the nearest accommodation reported hearing splashing, followed immediately by a single short sound. It ended almost immediately. Search teams reached the bank within minutes. A tripod stood in the mud near the water's edge with the camera still mounted. Running from the equipment directly into the shallow water was a clear set of drag marks pressed deep into the silt, wide enough and directional enough to indicate an animal of significant size moving rapidly with purpose. The camera was still on the tripod. Whatever image he was trying to make, he never got it. I've thought about that more than I probably should. Rangers reconstructed the sequence. Hartley had crouched at the water's edge to compose his frame. Crouching at a bank edge places the upper body over the water and reduces the distance between a person and anything lying below the bank shelf. In that posture, the upper body and face sit within striking range of an animal that had been lying motionless directly beneath. The strike came from less than 2 meters. Sean Hartley drowned. The crocodile initiates submersion immediately upon contact, and the rolling behavior that follows is specifically designed to prevent a prey animal from regaining the surface. Recovery teams located the body downstream the following morning, held against submerged vegetation, some distance from the entry point.
It was November 3rd, 2013, and the Luangwa River in Zambia ran at the level the early dry season produces, lower than flood peak, but substantial, moving with steady force between eroded clay banks shaped over centuries. Game trails pressed deep after months of consistent use ran between the water and the inland grazing areas, reliable in the way geography is reliable. Those corridors don't account for whoever happens to be standing in them. Ryan Young was 34 from Alberta, working as a fitness instructor who'd taken up wildlife photography as a reason to travel with purpose. He'd researched the Luangwa Valley systematically beforehand: lion behavior, crocodile territoriality, what made elephants dangerous. He hadn't given comparable attention to hippos, mentioning to others that he'd ranked them well below lions, crocodiles, and buffalo. That gap isn't unusual. Hippos fall outside the frame most people build in advance because they don't fit the visual template of a predator. Wildlife researchers in the region have noted the same disconnect for years. Hippos are frequently cited as responsible for more human fatalities annually than lions, leopards, and elephants combined. Yet they remain absent from the mental shortlist most travelers assemble before a trip. A lion attack reads as a dramatic, narratively coherent event, while a hippo encounter often reads beforehand as nothing happening at all. They're simply an animal on a path it has used for years, and a person who happened to be standing on it.
I understand exactly how that blind spot forms. You read everything you can find, and your attention gravitates towards the animal that looked the part: the teeth, the claws, the obvious silhouette.
A hippo doesn't register the same way, but that's what blinds us. They don't look dangerous. The common hippopotamus is the third largest land animal on Earth, behind only the elephant and the white rhino. An adult male can weigh up to 9,000 pounds, and hippos are among the continent's most consistently dangerous large mammals. Their danger isn't predatory, it's territorial. They spend daylight in or near water and move inland to graze in the cooler hours, returning along fixed paths worn into the ground over years. A hippo returning along one of these routes does not redirect around an obstacle. It moves through or over whatever is in the way. During a guided walk along the Luangwa, Ryan spotted a large hippo partially submerged about 60 yards out, surfacing at calm, measured intervals, the kind of stationary subject that rewards patient photography. He stepped slightly away from the group for a cleaner angle into a stand of tall grass at the bank's edge. The decision to move slightly away wasn't reckless. It was reasonable, a minor adjustment for a calm animal at real distance. What made it fatal had nothing to do with the hippo he was watching and everything to do with what was moving toward him through the grass beside him. A second hippo, grazing inland that morning, was returning to the river along an established trail that ran directly through the grass Ryan had chosen. The trail's curve kept its approach concealed until it was within a few yards of him. The hippo came around the concealed curve in the trail at close quarters, already at a distance where its mass made the outcome immediate. A common hippo at up to 9,000 pounds does not need speed to be lethal. Its primary weapon is its jaw. An adult male hippo can open its mouth to nearly 180 degrees and produces a bite force of approximately 1,800 pounds per square inch, with lower canine tusks that can exceed 20 inches. At the moment, Ryan turned at the sound behind him. The animal was already within striking range. The impact, either a strike from the body mass or an immediate bite, would have been overwhelming. Hippos do not linger over a target the way a predator does. The animal continued down the trail to the river exactly as it always had, indifferent. Ryan was found moments later by the guide. The injuries were consistent with a hippo's close-range response, massive blunt trauma, and bite wounds to the torso. The guide and the rest of the group reached him within moments. The hippo continued to the river, following the path it always had. What the investigation laid out afterward was almost geometric. The trail ran directly through where he'd stopped. There were fresh tracks and a recent dung deposit along it, a guide reads automatically, and a person watching a subject 60 yards out in the water never thinks to look for in the grass behind them.
That's the detail that stays with me longest of every story here. He was being careful. He was doing everything a responsible observer does.
He just never looked behind him. One direction, that's the entire difference between this outcome and a different one.
It was July 14th, 2018, in a conservancy in Kruger. Somewhere in the Lowveld scrub, a 420-pound male lion was about to teach a Karen a lesson no Instagram caption could capture. Danae Murray was 31 and had spent the better part of 3 years in Johannesburg, building a career that moved fast because she made it. She had pushed for this trip, a guided night safari in the greater Kruger area, as a birthday trip for herself, according to her coworkers who listened to her talk nonstop about it. She had booked a premium vehicle with a private guide because, according to her, apparently, half measures were not something she did. Her husband Liam had followed her lead on most of the planning. People who knew them said that was generally how things went. I think she genuinely believed that most warnings were written for the weakest person in the room and that she was not that person. Friends said that Liam had learned not to argue with her about it directly. However, the guide that evening, a man named Jacob, who had run night drives in this conservancy for 11 years, had not yet learned to read her. Jacob had announced over the radio at 8:40 p.m. that 2 other guides in the area had tracked a male lion moving through the central drainage corridor earlier that evening. Lions are Africa's apex terrestrial predator. Adult males can reach 420 pounds and nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, built entirely around explosive short-distance speed and the mechanics of bringing down large animals. They are not incidental dangers. A lion that feels cornered, surprised at close range, or provoked in low light will charge with very little warning beyond subtle posture, changes most tourists do not recognize quickly enough. When the vehicle stopped at a water point and Jacob instructed everyone to remain seated, Danae asked him if he always treated adults like they were children. Liam said nothing. The engine idled. Jacob said politely, addressing everyone, that lions can kill people. Then he said it again, looking at Danae specifically. She told Liam that Jacob was being dramatic. As the lion shifted closer through the drainage line, the brush parting silently ahead of him, Jacob raised his voice again, warning that the animal was watching the vehicle and to stay still. Witnesses later said the lion had lifted his head higher and fixed directly on the movement coming from Danae's side of the vehicle. Danae was still inside the vehicle, but had partially opened the door and stepped 1 foot onto the running board in order to steady her filming angle. The phone held out and angled back at her face in shaky low light, laughing, tracking toward the brush line, while Jacob immediately shouted at her to get back inside and reached across the seat toward the open door. When the lion charged, he did not vocalize. He covered the distance in several bounding strides. He simply moved, and then he was on her. The lion struck high, colliding into her upper body as she tried to pull backward through the half-open door. One paw hit across her chest and shoulder hard enough to spin her sideways off the running board, while the animal's weight carried both of them into the buffalo thorn beside the track. Witnesses described hearing the brush crack first, followed immediately by Danae, screaming once before the lion clamped onto the upper part of her torso near the neck and shoulder area. Liam ran toward her almost immediately and was struck aside by a glancing paw swipe that knocked him flat into the dirt. By the time Jacob and the other passengers began shouting and advancing toward the lion from the vehicle, the animal had already retreated back toward the brush line. Liam got up. Danae did not. A vehicle from a neighboring guide unit made the emergency call. Danae was loaded and airborne an hour later. She died from her injuries before they reached the clinic. After the attack, Liam returned to Johannesburg alone and eventually left his job and sold their shared apartment. The real tragedy isn't that she thought the world was bigger than her comfort zone. It's that she never understood why some boundaries exist to keep the wild from becoming a wound. It was the early morning of February 11, 2014, in a private conservancy in the Laikipia Plateau of central Kenya, where rocky outcrops broke the scrubland and fever trees lined dry riverbeds. The light was low and flat, ideal for photography. The Laikipia is quieter than the Mara, less trafficked, and the animals there move through the landscape with a kind of self-possession that is different from what you see in heavily visited reserves. Elena Petrova, 36, was a Russian wildlife photographer based in Nairobi. She had lived in Kenya for 4 years, working on a long-term personal project, documenting predator behavior in private conservancies. She was technically skilled and deeply familiar with the landscape, and she had photographed leopards on multiple occasions. Her guide was a local tracker named Mwenda Kariuki, 40, who had worked the Laikipia Conservancy for 8 years. Mwenda had noted Elena's tendency to push slightly beyond recommended positions, always seeking a cleaner angle or a less obstructed frame. Elena was not reckless in the way that Madison or Thomas were reckless. She had real knowledge, real experience, and a genuine understanding of the animals she was photographing. She had simply reached a point where her own judgment felt more reliable than the boundary she was being asked to stay within. The group had located a female leopard resting on a low granite outcrop, roughly 200 feet from the vehicle. Elena photographed from the vehicle for several minutes, then pushed to move to a position beside a large rock formation to the left for a direct sightline. Mwenda refused. Elena waited, then moved anyway, during a moment when Mwenda was speaking to another guest. Leopards are ambush predators that can shift from calm to a full attack in under a second, covering ground faster than most people can process. They are solitary, territorial, and highly sensitive to anything that enters their space from an unexpected angle. What made Elena's position particularly dangerous was not just the distance she had closed, it was that she had moved to a point that cut off the leopard's most direct escape route from the outcrop. A leopard that feels cornered does not wait. Elena crouched and adjusted her lens. Mwenda saw the leopard's posture change, ears flattening, body lowering, and called out sharply. Elena began to stand. The leopard came off the rock fast. It struck Elena across the face and left shoulder, driving her into the rock face. She was on the ground but conscious, trying to cover her face with her arms. The leopard bit into her left shoulder and upper neck, then released when Mwenda fired a warning shot. It did not go far. It retreated roughly 20 feet and crouched low in the scrub, watching. As Mwenda reached Elena and began pulling her upright, the leopard rose and took several steps forward. Mwenda fired a second warning shot directly in front of it. The animal stopped, held its position for a moment, then turned and moved into the brush at a slow, deliberate pace, not fleeing, just withdrawing. That detail has always stayed with me. It did not run. It left on its own terms. The wound to Elena's upper neck was deep and bleeding heavily. Mwenda applied pressure and drove back toward the Conservancy's base camp. She remained conscious for most of the drive, then lost consciousness in the final minutes. She died before a medical evacuation could be arranged. Blood loss from lacerations to the neck and shoulder. The attack had been defensive, not predatory, but the injuries were in a location where field intervention was not enough. Mwenda had done everything correctly from the moment the leopard moved. None of it was enough, because the wound was in a place where the margin between survivable and fatal was measured in minutes, and the nearest medical facility was too far away. The incident was classified as a wildlife fatality. Mwenda was cleared of negligence. The leopard was not destroyed. Elena's camera was recovered intact, the last frame showing the leopard on the outcrop, calm and still, minutes before the attack. Her body was repatriated to Russia. She had spent 4 years in Kenya, building a body of work about predator behavior. The one thing she had not fully accounted for was the specific geometry of where she was standing, and that single miscalculation was the one that mattered. It was the 12th of March, 2019, at a field site in the Okavango Delta in northern Botswana. The area was a stretch of mixed woodland and savanna where hollow logs, termite mounds, and root systems dotted the landscape and provided natural cover for a wide range of animals. A reptile research program was running out of the site with a clear rule that applied to every member of the team: no probing or handling of any shelter site without clearance from the herpetologist. The rule was not a suggestion. Cheryl Daniels was 25, a registered nurse in advanced training from Atlanta, Georgia. She was medically experienced, fast-thinking, and used to making decisions under pressure without waiting to be told what to do. In a clinical setting, those qualities made her effective. In the field, they made her harder to slow down. She had grown up as an only child after her father died when she was 5, raised entirely by her mother, who had given up a great deal to make sure Cheryl got where she was going. Her mother had been at the airport to see her off before this trip, and Cheryl had every intention of coming home with something real to show for it, not just observation notes from a distance. Colleagues said she is the kind of person that doesn't like looking inexperienced. When a rule felt like it was designed for a different situation than the one she was actually in, she had a tendency to make that call herself rather than wait for someone else to make it for her. On the 6th day of field work, Cheryl was assigned to document activity around termite mounds and hollow logs in her section of the site. The herpetologist was busy but reachable by radio. The rest of the team was spread out nearby. While moving through a stretch of acacia woodland, she noticed faint movement coming from inside a hollow log close to the ground. She stopped and watched it. She knew the protocol. She knew what she was supposed to do next. She did not reach for her radio. The radio was right there. The herpetologist was reachable. The protocol existed for exactly this situation. She knew all of it. She knelt down anyway. Earlier in the week, the team had seen monitor lizard activity in similar logs. The movement looked the same to her. The log was low. The opening was easy to reach, and the whole thing seemed like a straightforward check. She had removed her gloves while taking field notes a few minutes earlier and had not put them back on. She knelt down beside the log and pushed her bare hand several inches into the hollow without looking inside first. The log was occupied by a black mamba. Black mambas will typically attempt to escape when disturbed, but in a confined space with no room to retreat, a defensive strike becomes likely. The distance between the animal and her hand was near zero. A strike at that range carries a high probability of significant envenomation. Cheryl pulled her hand back the moment contact happened. She knew within seconds what it likely was. The pain was not the defining feature. The speed of what followed was. Onset was rapid, which indicated a heavy envenomation. Everything she did after that was right. She stayed as still as she could, kept her breathing steady, and radioed her team with her exact location and a clear description of what had happened. She did not run. She did not try to treat it herself. She sat on the ground and waited, and kept herself as calm as a person in that situation can keep themselves. This is the part of Cheryl's story that I find hardest to read. The moment the strike happened, she did everything correctly. The progression moved faster than the response window allowed. Black mamba venom is neurotoxic, and it moves through the system quickly in cases of significant envenomation. Within the first 30 minutes, Cheryl's hands and arms were becoming weak. Her speech began to slur, and her breathing was already becoming shallow. Before the team reached her, her coordination was going. Her eyelids were heavy and difficult to hold open. Breathing, which she had been controlling deliberately, was becoming progressively harder to sustain. The anti-venom was 47 minutes from the site. The symptoms were progressing faster than that window allowed. The field kit on location had no bag valve mask, no oxygen supply, and no way to assist her breathing if it failed. There was no effective way on site to reverse or support the progression. When the team reached her, they kept her still and limited. Movement of the affected arm. Standard protocol for snakebite response in the field. The herpetologist was among the first to arrive at her position. Cheryl Daniels, 25, died from respiratory failure due to neurotoxic envenomation before the anti-venom reached the field site. The investigation confirmed Cheryl had approached the log without radioing the herpetologist, violating program protocol. Her gloves were found nearby, removed before the approach. The black mamba was identified and confirmed. Bite marks on her right hand were consistent with a close-range defensive strike. The death was classified as a fieldwork fatality resulting from an unsanctioned animal interaction. Her body was returned to Atlanta. Her mother buried her surrounded by friends, colleagues, and family. The same people who had watched a quiet girl, raised by one parent, work her way across the world to do something that mattered to her. Her mother was at the airport to see her off. She came home in a way neither of them had imagined standing in that departure hall. I have covered a lot of cases in this series. This is the one that stayed with me the longest.
It was July 6, 2020, on the western bank of the Luangwa River in Zambia. A driver known for finding what others missed was about to miss the one thing that mattered most. Ben Chola was 39 years old and had been driving safari transport routes through the South Luangwa Valley for 11 years. He worked for a mid-tier lodge operator out of Mfue, running guests between the airstrip, the lodge, and occasional bush stops during golden hour. He was not a guide by title, but functioned as one, in practice pointing out birds, naming trees, reading animal behavior before guests could lift their binoculars.
His passengers remembered him, making me think he's one of those people who had a reputation for finding things others missed and for knowing when to stop.
He supported 12 people across 2 households and was saving for a Land Cruiser to double his income through independent transfers.
That's a detail I want to keep in mind before you judge his actions here.
He had 3 months of savings and made an unscheduled stop on July 6th solely because the light was exceptional and his passengers were eager. A lodge ranger had issued a verbal advisory at the morning briefing. Hippo activity near the southern bank crossings had been elevated for 3 consecutive days, with a bull sighted repeatedly near a sandbar below the second bend. Hippopotamus amphibius is responsible for more human fatalities in Africa than nearly any large terrestrial animal, a fact obscured by how placidly they float. An adult bull can weigh over 3,000 pounds, move at 19 miles per hour on land in short bursts, and open its jaws to nearly 4 feet. They are territorial, and at dusk, you better run because they move.
This is the part of the story I found baffling because Ben was at that briefing.
Yet he still parked on a flat section of bank above a 2-foot shelf of undercut clay, roughly 60 feet from the waterline. One passenger later told investigators they had seen a dark shape in the shallows before the stop and assumed it was a submerged log. It moved once and went still. The hippo came out of the water fast, a displacement sound, and then the animal was already mid-stride on the bank. It hit the driver's side of the minibus with its shoulder and full body weight, caving the door panel inward and snapping the side mirror cleanly off. The impact shifted the rear wheels toward the crumbling edge. The clay gave way. The minibus tipped onto its driver's side and slid down the embankment. Windows on the passenger side blew out from the pressure shift. River water began pulling in through the gaps, cold and brown. Passengers scrambled through the broken frames onto the collapsing bank. Based on investigations, Ben's seatbelt had torqued during the roll and would not release. He worked himself partially through the shattered driver's side window, shoulders through, hips still pinned against the crushed door frame. The hippo remained in the shallows briefly after the impact, then moved toward the vehicle opening. Witnesses on the bank saw it lunge once toward the exposed side of the minibus, clamping its jaws around Ben's upper body and left shoulder. The animal held for seconds, shook once, then released. It made one additional brief charge toward the vehicle before losing focus and submerging back into deeper water. Ben did not move again after that. He was still partially lodged in the window frame when the animal finally withdrew. His upper body slumped against the exterior of the crushed door. Escaped passengers ran to a nearby lodge on foot to alert rangers, who immediately realized that it was not a rescue operation, but a retrieval one. Now, Ben Chola was doing exactly what the job required. And in a country where turning down a spontaneous stop can cost the driver a tip, a reference, or the contract itself, keep in mind that pressure is never a small thing. It was June 14th, 2020, in Hwange National Park, Zimbabwe. Some stories don't fall apart because of one terrible decision. They unravel through a series of tiny ones that barely register in the moment. I think this one is one of those stories, and by the time anyone realized it, they were already behind. Malcolm was 34, an electrician from Maribor, Slovenia, the kind of man who spent his weekdays inside industrial panels and his weekends researching places most people only see on screensavers. His friend Pavel Rizan, 33, had grown up on 2 streets over and had agreed to split the cost after Malcolm sent him a 6-paragraph message about why this was the right way to see Africa. He was methodical, confident, and genuinely curious, the combination that serves a man well in most situations and very poorly in a few specific ones. Hwange is Zimbabwe's largest national park, covering 5,600 square miles of mopane, woodland, open grassland, and dense riverine thicket that holds one of the continent's highest lion densities. African lions are ambush predators. Adult males can weigh over 400 pounds, reach a sprint speed of 50 miles per hour in short bursts, and can use powerful jaws and neck muscles to fatally compress the airway and major blood vessels within moments. They do not stalk the way leopards do. They wait, compressed into cover, and they use proximity rather than distance. By the time you hear movement, the geometry of the situation has already resolved against you. Their guide that morning had done this for 11 years. Before the group left the vehicle, he ran through the rules with a kind of specificity that comes from having seen what happens when people don't listen. Single file, no deviation, no stopping without instruction. Stay close behind the person in front of you. He was carrying a rifle. Malcolm nodded. Pavel nodded. I don't think either of them took as seriously as they should have. And I think they both knew it in the moment and dismissed anyway. Roughly 40 minutes into the walk, they crossed a section of soft red soil where a set of lion tracks pressed deep and clear across the path. Large, very fresh, the edges still crisp. Malcolm crouched and looked at them, then looked at Pavel. The guide identified them as belonging to at least one adult male, likely made earlier that morning, and told the group to stay tight and move with more deliberate steps. What happened next is the part I keep turning over. Malcolm paused beside the tracks, and Pavel stopped with him. The guide noticed immediately and ordered them back into line, but drawn by a second set of tracks veering into the brush line to the east, they stepped off the trail and into the thicket. The guide shouted at them immediately. They did not stop. The lion was less than 20 yards inside the brush. It came out of cover low and fast, covering the distance in under 2 seconds. It hit Malcolm in the chest with enough force to take him off his feet entirely. There was no charge sequence, no warning sound, just sudden, violent contact. The lion pinned Malcolm's chest with both forelegs and closed its jaws around his throat. Malcolm's arms came up. His hands pressed against the animal's face and neck. Within approximately 15 seconds, the movement in his arms stopped. Pavel was standing 4 feet away. He did not run. He stood there watching, which I think says something about how completely the brain can fail to process what the eyes are sending it. The guide arrived, shouting and advancing toward the lion. With no safe shot while the lion was on Malcolm, he fired a round into the ground several yards from the animal. The lion released the body, gripped it again at the shoulder, dragged it approximately 8 yards through the brush, then released it and retreated into the thicket. Pavel ran back toward the trail. The guide radioed park headquarters while keeping eyes on the brush line. Rangers and paramedics arrived in roughly 20 minutes. Malcolm was pronounced dead at the scene. Pavel gave his statement to investigators the following morning. He flew home 4 days later. I have thought about what those 4 days looked like for him, and I honestly cannot get there. The investigation concluded that the pair had violated every core protocol established for guided walking safaris and that the outcome was a direct consequence of that decision. Reading this story back, the death feels inevitable by the second paragraph. And that, more than anything else, is what makes it generally difficult to sit with.